Hi there, and welcome to Peninsula Players Presents, and the beginning and actually continuation of our talk with Audra Baakari Boyle, our business manager, historian, and archivist, about the 85-year history of Peninsula Players Theatre. And our last interview on July 28th, Audie and I talked about the founding of the theater, and we went right up to the opening in 1937. And that's about where we're going to pick up now. So, Audie,
Right.
ready to
Yes.
jump
Oh,
in?
I am, and I'm happy to be back to share this adventure.
Yes. Actually, this is very fun for both of us because it's great finding out about how this all happened and some amazing people and
People
events.
in it,
And
exactly. It's just, I'm just always tickled
yeah.
diving in there. So,
So the theater opened in 1937, and but first the Fishers, the founder Caroline
Mhm.
Fisher, had to purchase the property, and the property belonged to the Wildwood Camp for Boys. So, Audie, tell us a little bit about that.
Certainly in Dark County at that time, there were about at least six other youth camps that I'm aware of. And it was a popular activity in the 1920s for families across the country to send their kids ages 10 to 16 to Door County for the summer by train. And there was a sister camp in the state park, Camp Minagaha, I believe is how it's pronounced. And here's my disclaimer, I'm terrible at pronunciations. So um, um, but the sister camp was in the state park, and that was where the girls' camp was. And then the boys' camp was located at what is now our current location, and it was a tent camp. So they would pitch tents on the side, they cook their meals over a campfire, they had a lodge and a boathouse for the canoes. And they would have competitions with the other boys' camps in the area. So I have found at like the Ephraim Regala that they would compete, and they had competitions for swimming, underwater swimming, two-man canoe, canoe tipping, and watermelon races. They
So,
had
like
these
the Olympics.
like the Olympics, yeah, the Summer Olympics in Door County. And the girls' camp, they would come to visit once a year, and they would enter down the stone staircase in the back of their property. And the girls would come down for like a cotillion dance, and the boys would greet them at the bottom of the stairs. And they'd have a celebration evening afterwards. So.
So when the Fishers bought the camp, the staircase was already
The
there,
staircase was already there, and that's made the large stone staircase in the back of the theater that comes down the hill from the upper parking lot. And
and also the boathouse
the
was there.
boathouse was there, and they had one other building. So there was the lodge that they had, the boathouse, and the ice house, which is where they
And
stored their food.
and tell us about the ice house.
The ice house is now our box office, is what it was converted to. So that log cabin portion that people see is what came with the property. Everything else around it, the garage, the house, that's now our costume shop, the box, the administrative offices, was what the Fishers built for Mama and Papa Fisher to live in. And that was their abode.
Right. So they
So,
had a living room downstairs and a bedroom
and a
upstairs.
bedroom upstairs, and a garage was attached, and then an upper bedroom was put above the ice house as well. And I think that might have been one of the dorms that they then said, because they constructed two dorms, a women's dorm and a men's dorm, for the company to move into. So I think one of the two was used for the men versus the ladies. And so they added a bathhouse and they added a dorm, but the dorm ended up being really a one-room schoolhouse from Marinette that they moved on logs across the ice, across the bay in the winter to the property, and then built a bathhouse next to it that we still continue to use that dorm. And we like to name our buildings. So that's the old dorm, as opposed to what's attached to it that we got a motel donated one of their cabins to us, and that's the new dorm that I think we got in the 60s.
Oh, okay. When I first started at the Players in '88, I stayed in the old
In the
dorm.
old dorm.
It
And
was, it
yeah,
very much felt like summer camp.
yes. Yep.
Yeah.
There's photos of, people in bunk beds set up in there and everything else. So they started with that, and everything was under construction. So I located an ad in 1935 that the sports equipment from the Wildwood Camp for Boys was up for auction.
Mm.
And so I think this idea sparked in Caroline and Richard while they were performing that season, knowing that that was there, that it was successful enough that there was an audience, there was an interest in this to have people attend shows. So they managed to get the camp. And I think Mama and Papa just really believed in their kids, and they helped get the finances and make that happen for
Hmm.
everybody. So the entire family moved to the property for the
And
summer.
so the boathouse was already there, but there was more to it. There was a pier,
There
right?
was a pier that went out, and it was open air on one side, and you could see the rocks uplifting it, so the canoes could just come right in and be stored there. But what Caroline and Richard wanted to do, in addition to performing at night 3 nights a week on stage, was also conduct a school. So they converted the boathouse into an audience area, added a mini stage tower to it, and brought apprentices in to work on scenes, shows, and Richard, as a writer, produced his original works there on a Sunday night. And so they converted it into the Wharf Theater, is what they
Hmm.
ended up naming it.
Hmm.
And that's where the apprentice actors they would develop their skills and hone their skills there. And they took classes. They were offering, the company members themselves would teach dance workshops or monologue workshops, character workshops, and all sorts of other growth potential
Hmm.
for those there.
I remember when I first got to the Players, I would go to the rocks around the boathouse, and I could still see the posts from the old pier there, which apparently I don't know if it got washed away or
Yeah, there's so many different stories of the ice coming in, the ice shoves come in and out each winter and taking the pier away, or taking the stage tower away over the decades, or where did the rest stage tower go? We don't know. I mean, you could see pictures of the boathouse and then the little stage tower, but that stage tower part isn't there anymore. So if
no.
anybody
Yeah.
knows, let me know.
Yeah. And of course, the boathouse is still used today where we house interns.
Hmm.
And also, speaking of nature, the old lodge is now gone. We have a different lodge,
Yes,
and
but the
that,
fireplace is still there. So
yes.
the fireplace, it was from the original lodge of the boys camp, and I believe in the 1960s is when the structure burnt down. But what the Fishers did do for that lodge is they attached a kitchen. They didn't have a place to cook, because with the boys camp, everybody cooked outside. So you were cooking over a fire. So they added a kitchen. And I really had to giggle, Greg, doing this research, because one of the first things I stumbled across was a classified want ad for a kitchen stove. And
Uh-huh.
having worked at the Players, with the various cooks that have come through, come through and fed us, so nicely fed us and taken care of us, always complaining about the stove that they're working with, that and
And
knowing
the
what a struggle it is and how important it is to have a company and keep them fed, that was a
yes,
top priority, was having a stove.
and we have a great industrial stove
Yes,
now
we
that
do
works
now.
pretty
It's
well.
wonderful and amazing, and oh, but
So the Fishers, they got the property. There were buildings already there. The fire pit. I think that
the fire pit, what the lore there is, that was another cold storage area for food during the boys camp, and it may have
mhm,
also been something that the Fishers used until its roof caved in, and then they turned it into the fire pit. So
gotcha.
when that fire pit came into existence and when that roof came in, I don't have anything documented. So
Hmm.
if somebody
Yeah.
does know that, That'd be great too.
Yes. There's a lot of history still to be uncovered out there. So they got the camp,
They got the camp.
and they needed a theater.
They needed a theater, and that's what they started building then. And
Hmm.
so Papa Fisher, C.R. Fisher, was an electrical engineer, and he kind of designed it. They hired tradesmen to come in and help get things set up. But it's a lot. Then they were doing that. They were getting the bathroom set up. I don't know what they did for the general public. I know that the bathhouse was for the company. I don't know what the general public was used for. They were clearing land, and they needed some help. So the
Hmm.
company of actors that they hired, they brought up early. And they were helping to do all of this, from helping to clear the land and move bags of cement. And I have a reporter who came up from Green Bay and just really did say in the Green Bay Press Gazette of 1937 that it was an inspiration and a comical sight to see young actors and actresses and the production crew armed with hose, picks, axes, and shovels, clearing the land for the stage and pit, improving the road and parking lot, and generally tidying up the premises. So
And of course, that stage house was built on supports. They didn't dig into the ground because,
right.
as we found out when we built the new theater and put in an orchestra pit and everything, that's all just rock down there.
It's all just rock. So they just stacked it up, just like the boathouse was stacked up over the water, and put on pylons, and then built there. And they built the stage house, and then they on the backside had dressing rooms. So there was a little bit of a backway path, and one dressing room for the men, one dressing room for the ladies, an entrance, and then to the back of that they attached a little storage area. They built a storage area as well for scenery and costumes that they could store there season after season. So that was
Yes,
all put in. They had masonaries come in to help put the stone walls along the side to mark off where the audience should be sitting. They erected a couple electrical poles so lighting could be shown, and they were planning on playing recorded music. So they had to put in some speakers and other things for the audience as well. So they're preparing for opening night. And just as any opening night, I was reading along, and nothing ever changes. Everything's the same. There's excitement, there's this, there's that, life happens. So, opening night, July 17, 1937, it's raining
uh,
almost all day up until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And then everybody's scrambling to grab some of the loose gravel to put down where the audience needs to sit because it's all wet. It's all outdoors. And so they're doing that. They're getting the chairs set up, the canvas chairs. So it was, everybody who loves those canvas chairs, and I do say love, um, they were still in use, set up circle wise in front of the theater. And they got those all set up and arranged for everything. And then Caroline, who was in the show that evening, she is out in the parking lot helping to park cars and tear tickets to get people in to see The Importance of Being Earnest, up to half hour before she needs to go backstage and get dressed to be Gwendolyn.
hmm.
So I just, knowing that that's what she was doing, I'm like, there's nothing that how often have that's been the case for so many of us, running around
Indeed,
scrambling to do this and get that done and
indeed. You
everything
you
else.
gotta love it.
You got it exactly. So it was fun to read it and go, oh my gosh, yes, we've been there.
Indeed. So the theater opened with the importance of being
Mhm.
earnest. And I think if you look at the season that year,
Yes.
again, like the first season in 1935 behind the Bonnybrook
Mm-hmm.
Motel, it was a combination of a variety of stuff. And again, we have everything in this season from the importance of being earnest to the way of the world, a
Mm-hmm.
restoration
Mm-hmm.
comedy. And Mama Fisher, Caroline's mother, in the year before, when they knew they were going to
Mhm.
do The Way of the World, she worked on some of the costumes, right?
She spent the entire 1936 and up until opening about 18 months sewing all of the period costumes that were used in that production. And she was also the cook. And there were many stories over the years of people letting me know, former company members, that since she was the seamstress and the cook, that if you were going through the food line and she thought she couldn't let your costume out anymore, she'd hold back a little bit on what portions she'd dish out.
She didn't want to do any
She
adjusting.
didn't want to do any, exactly. Um, but and with any other season too, things pop up and things change, and it was a theirs to run. And I know the announcement for that, they had hoped to actually open with at Mrs. Beams, but they changed it to the importance of being earnest, because I remember Caroline saying somewhere, if we're going to do a comedy, we're going to do one of merit. And so they opened with that. But I also think something else happened, because I was also reading that Gertrude Needham, who was to be in Mrs. Beams, fell and hurt
Mm.
her knee. And she ended up being recast as Lady Bracknell in The Importance of Being Earnest. So if we have an actress with a hurt knee, and I think you and I both know when people get injured at the Players, it's a little bit of a crisis.
Crisis, yes, because we didn't have understudies.
Right. And at that time they didn't either. So they just switched the play, I think. And that's how The Importance of Being Earnest ended up.
Yes, when you see playbills subject to change,
Change.
that's one of the
That's
things that
why.
happens. And then you mentioned Gertrude Needham, but also in the company were some other notable people.
There really were. And the 37 was the first year that Helen Casey Bragdon joined us, as well as Henry Kurth from the Goodman School and Sam Wanamaker. So Sam Wanamaker is a wonderful narrative, because he was sweet enough to narrate a documentary video for a graduate student who did a documentary on Peninsula Players in the late 1980s, early 90s. And he tells the story of arriving at Peninsula Players and remembering to help build the theater, that he was there with moving a wheelbarrow and a shovel and helping to build the stage house that was still in existence up to decades later, when he was sharing his stories.
And for those people who don't know, Sam Wanamaker was in films for quite a while, a film
Mm-hmm.
actor, and went on to do some other stuff, which we'll talk about.
Yes.
But because he established a wonderful connection between us and England.
He did. And it was right after the 1937 that he went to England to perform. And it fascinates me. Okay, I'll just jump right in, because Sam was one of the inspirations behind the rebuilding of the Globe Theater in England. And he didn't get to see his dream come true, but he went from helping to build a theater in Door County, Wisconsin, to then London, perhaps didn't find the Globe there. And it sparked something in him that this needed to be done. And he spent the rest of his life pursuing that dream of getting the
Hmm.
Globe up and running. And
Hmm.
there's a lovely plaque at Peninsula Players that has a sister plaque at the Globe that's right at our entryway of Sam and Shakespeare and All the World's a Stage. And it's just
And
an amazing
that's
connection.
always been extremely meaningful to me because my background in Chicago theater is mostly with Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that Peninsula Players and the Globe Theatre in London are
They're
connected
connected. And there's so many
in that way.
connections. It's just the legacy of, that's just one of many that we're going to discuss and recall as we go through this series.
Right. And you also mentioned Henry Kurth and
Henry Kurth was he was on the technical end. So he ended up becoming a lighting and scenic designer. And he ended up designing lights for Martha Graham and other dancers, notable dancers throughout his career, and designed more than 450 theater productions. But and also from the Goodman School of Drama. But he and Sam, the summer after 1937, then went to Woodstock, Illinois, and worked together for another summer stock company that they performed there, which is related to Wisconsin, and that was the first theater that Orson Welles performed at. So
Hmm.
it's just all these legacies and connections.
And the other weird connection is that I also did a show there, a production of She Stoops to Conquer from the Court Theater in around 78.
So it is. It just always fascinates me, all these little interlooping things. And
Yes.
oh,
And there was another person in the company that year, Clay Franklin.
Clay Franklin, and he arrived as an established playwright. And so you can go and see his works, playwright as a playwright that he's written, and he was there to help with direction and I believe to help mentor Richard as he was writing one of the works that they did. So they would perform on the main stage Thursday, Friday, and Saturdays, and then Sundays would be in the Wharf Theater, and that's where the original works were, and that's where Richard's Seven Seabirds, which is one of the last shows that they presented, was done. And it's fascinating to look at what the different topics were. And Richard was, he adapted Salome, he adopted Oedipus Rex, and so he was more intellectual in his thinking. So Seven Seabirds was not a comedy. Kind of a look at the future of what would happen if fascism took over at
I
that
see.
time. So
How prescient. Yeah.
yes, but they did do characters and they did do reviews. So before Saturday Night Live, they were writing. Richard and Helen Bragdon were putting together little musical reviews together, and satire on contemporary themes. So when in Rome, that season of 1937 included characters of Gone with the Wind, which was just published and coming out, Noel Coward, and the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. So
Wow. So they did their 37
mhm,
season, and they did okay.
they did okay. They did. Huh?
Yeah. And then at the end of that season, then Caroline, she took off again.
She took off again and she headed to Hollywood. So that was where she spent the summer of 1937 negotiating her contract with Wesley Ruggles. She wouldn't sign a contract unless she got her summers off because she wanted to come back to Peninsula Players and support her brother and be part of the theater.
And we
So
talked about that in the last interview
yes,
about how Carolyn was quoted as saying, "The only reason I'm in Hollywood is to make money to pay for Peninsula Players."
right. And that was pretty much it. So she's gone off there and spends the winter in California, but she doesn't come back in 1938 because she met somebody and fell in love. And
And who was that?
romances happen.
Yes.
Mr. Rodion Rathbone graduated from Oxford and went to visit his father, Basil Rathbone, in December of 1937. And Basil was in Hollywood filming, making movies with his new wife, Ouida. And Rodion moved in to the house to stay with them to get to know his dad a little better and met Caroline. And it was a whirlwind romance, and they got married before June of 1938.
Oh my goodness. And tell us about all of that.
Finding them. It was so exciting for me a few years ago. I was just, what if I go on eBay and look up Caroline Fisher? And oh my gosh, yes, my heart went pitter pat. And because I found wedding photos that were Associated Press wedding photos. So I bought them and I waited anticipation for them to come back to me. And when they did, I flipped them over and I got to read the Associated Press photo credits on the back as
Uh-huh.
to who was in attendance at this wedding. So Basil's wife, Ouida, was known as the hostess of Hollywood. And Caroline and Rodion's wedding became a real Hollywood party.
Hmm.
And they ended up getting married in the back garden of Basil and Ouida's house. And in attendance were Myrna Loy, Gary Cooper, and all Claudette Colbert, and all of these other famous Hollywood actresses. And I'm reading about the wedding party. And it's at that point I learned that her sister Caroline, Caroline's sister Margot, ended up eloping 2 weeks before with another different Hollywood executive, Mr. Fredericks. So she's a bridesmaid. But Caroline's maid of honor is Constance Collier. And that's when tingles went up and down my spine, because she's a great Shakespearean English actress. And I was like, she was in Hollywood? I thought, what? And to go to find out then that she was Caroline's acting coach.
Oh my.
And that's looking at Constance Collier's career from starting on stage as a 3-year-old and playing all of these great Shakespearean dramatic roles and being a great Shakespearean performer like Basil was. They were good friends in Hollywood. And Constance was also Marilyn Monroe's diction coach, just all of these famous people's coaches. So just to find out all those connections was just amazing. And in that aspect. So with 1938, if we can kind of ease our way into there, and
but one thing
conversation
before
of Shakespeare,
that,
but go ahead. Yeah.
there was a little bit of scuttlebutt about the wedding, and so Basil Rathbone never made it to Peninsula Players.
Right, because in looking at everything and all of the press announcements, Caroline and Rodian's wedding was supposed to be in June at the Church of the Little Flower. And then all of a sudden it springs up that they're getting married in the back of the Rathbones' home in the garden. And it really is because Caroline and Richard just felt it was becoming more of a Hollywood press party than about their wedding. So that sort of started a little bit of tension between them. And Rodian never wanted to take the Rathbone name as when he started his acting career. That's what I'm trying to get to. So he didn't want to market it. He didn't want to ride on his father's coattails. He wanted to be his own person and succeed. So that was kind of a little bit like spontaneous wedding and all of the guests, but it still made the newspapers all over the world because it's Basil Rathbone's son. So as I'm doing this research, I'm finding articles in Canada, Sydney, Australia, have pictures of their wedding and all of these quotes. I'm just,
wow.
Oh yeah, it's all that glamour, all that celebrity. And then it all comes back to Little Fish Creek and Little Peninsula Players in Door County. And it's mind-blowing.
So they got married and then almost immediately came back up to Door County.
Well, the family did, but I believe Caroline stayed. She stayed in California because Rodian then was trying to launch a film career of his own. So he was using the film name of John Rodian. So he didn't use Rathbone, but he would show up. He was in 2 films. He was in the Dawn Patrol, which was about World War I flying aces with Errol Flynn, David Niven, and his dad, Basil Rathbone. And then he was in The Dark Tower, which was a period piece where Basil was Richard III and Boris Karloff was the executioner. And Rodian lost his head to Boris Karloff. So,
how fun.
But Caroline was out there and she was going to come back on by train to Fish Creek in 1938 to do Shakespeare. They had secured Constance Collier to do Twelfth Night for them, and Caroline was going to be Viola. Hopefully I got that right. And so they had planned the season around that. And I got to find my notes because I just want to make sure I'm getting this correct here. So included in there was supposed to be Twelfth Night. And it didn't came to be because of a car accident in Hollywood. So an actress that Constance Collier was in a film with got into an automobile accident and hurt her leg, and she could not continue filming. So they had to replace her with Claudette Colbert, and Constance had to reshoot all of those scenes. So she couldn't get on a train to come to Fish Creek to direct Twelfth Night. So they shifted things around and never ended up performing Shakespeare at Peninsula Players, but they did try.
They did.
They did try. and it was so, and then, but that was the year they also did at Mrs. Beam's, then is what they opened with. And
Hmm.
then they did Lysistrata, a nice Greek tragedy that Richard did in modern dress. So he adapted it to a little bit more contemporary time. With
Hmm.
that, Night Must Fall was so successful that they extended it. They
Hmm.
actually did an extra performance of it because they couldn't get everybody in. So there was the popularity of a murder mystery.
Yes.
And that. So, and because that was so popular, when they couldn't do 12th Night, that's, I think, when they added the Dark Tower, they just added another mystery drama.
I gotcha.
And they couldn't
And
do that. And I have a lovely story for Lady Windermere's Fan, was another production then that they did that season, that Richard was very particular. He had particular tastes and he knew what he wanted. And he wasn't happy with how the scenery was looking for that production. He didn't like how the curtain looked. So the night before opening, this story was told in the Door County Advocate. Richard redid everything. He just went out there and redid the curtain, redid the opening act scenery, and did, just because he had a particular way he wanted that show presented to the audience.
oh my word.
So
Yeah. And I love also that they continued the tradition, which we still do
mhm.
today, of a wide variety of material.
Wide variety, exactly.
Yeah.
And within that season is when the Keaches joined us. So Stacy Keach and his wife Mary were with the Peninsula Players, and they was also the first season that Bob Robert Thompson joined us. And Bob
Hmm.
always loved to say he started in 1938 and got room and board and $5 a week. So that was the average salary for a member of the company, was you got fed, you got housed, and $5 a week.
Yes. And some years ago, Stacy Keach Jr., who a lot of our audience will know from TV and films, was doing a national tour of the play Frost Nixon, and it came through Green Bay, I believe, or Appleton. And when he was growing up, his parents, Stacy and Mary, spoke so lovingly of their experience at the Players that he really wanted to see it. And so
Mm-hmm.
he had someone drive him up, and I got a chance to meet him, which was
He's
great.
so gracious, was
Such a
just
nice man.
delighted to see where they spent time, and it was beautiful.
Yes. And he was gracious enough to do an interview with us, and he just loved seeing the place where his parents had had such a
Mhm.
great time.
And they did another wide variety. So they, it was an amazing amount of shows, from comedies to satire to everything else. And some audiences either, they loved some things, and other things, a little off the mark, but they still came.
Hmm.
And it was also during that Rodian was filming, and Caroline too was also featured by the end of the year in Collier's magazine. She was
Hmm.
featured as an upcoming starlet to watch out for, with three other actresses who were of the contemporaries, and the other three ended up having film careers, and including Jean Rogers, Martha Scott, and Lynn Carver. And it's just fascinating to me, that this is something that was on Caroline's horizon. She was going to be performing under the name Caroline Blake, so she was under contract with the studio and Wesley, and just continuing to train with Constance.
Hmm.
And then we slowly move into 1939,
Yes.
and which I like to call the Hollywood years.
Yes. Because.
Because at that point we then move where Caroline has been in California and meeting people. She's now then met Jacqueline Wells, who is a film actress and a silent star. She started in silent films, and was one of her films that she was in was Laurel and Hardy's The Bohemian Girl. And you can still catch little snippets of it in YouTube. I was just watching one before this interview started, but she started off as a silent film actress and was moving into speakeasies, talkies.
Uh-huh.
But Caroline said, I've got a theater for the summer. Why don't you come out, spend some time in Dark County, have a little bit of a vacation? And they did. And it was this big, while she was on stage at Peninsula Players, her films that she was in were being shown in the state, in Green Bay, in Sturgeon Bay. And so there was this Hollywood film actress playing in The Circle and
Uh-huh.
Dracula and these other productions that were there. And she met another one of our company members, Martin McBroom, who was with us in 1935. He was a student at Northwestern and working, and she convinced him to go to Hollywood after that year, and he became David Bruce, and he ended up being in films with Errol Flynn during most of his during the war years. So we've got Martin, and Bob Thompson was there again that year. And this was the first year that Jean Sincere joined as one of the apprentice actresses. And there's a quote of hers, she's working as one of the students. She's working in the box office during the day. And she says, I was so jealous of you guys up on that stage. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be one of you. And she got a chance in Salome.
Mm-hmm.
So Richard had taken Oscar Wilde's Salome and put in front of it Noel Coward's Ways and Means. And then Salome, and I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly too, was done. And so Jean is in the background holding a fan over Stacy Keach, who's, King Herod. And the highlight of Salome was Margot Fisher, who company member Maggie Magerstedt has described as sultry and a good comedian, doing the dance of the seven veils. It's 1937. The Hays Code is in effect for movies. So if anybody knows a little film history, you couldn't kiss for longer than 2 seconds on screen. Married couples had to sleep in separate beds. There was all of these obscenity laws. But Margot Fisher was dancing the dance of the seven veils on stage at Peninsula Players live, underscored by Strauss's opera. So Richard got the soundtrack and score and was the recording, so that was playing underneath. And I found this beautiful quote from Maggie Magerstedt about this, and I'm gonna have to try to find it here real quick. Oh my gosh, where did it go?
I also
the
wanted
highlight.
we were just talking about Jean Sincere too, and one of the things that was notable about Jean was that between this year in 39 and 1992, Jean did 17 seasons with the Players and was associated a lot of that time with Bob Thompson. And if you look at my interview in Peninsula Players Presents with Francesca Zambello, her daughter, you'll find out a little bit more about her too.
And with that relationship with Bob and Jean, that within this time frame is when Leo and Helen Bragdon kind of became the couple, leading man and leading lady character. They were really tight. But back to Salome, was Maggie Magerstedt, who was with the company later because they redid performances of this. It was so, Dance of the Seven Veils was very popular. But Maggie recalls it as, there was much suspense on the peninsula as to whether she would drop that last veil at the end of the play. No one will ever know, because the lights were dimming, she was near the edge of the stage, and her hand was at the clasp of the last veil when the lights went out.
So dramatic.
I was so, I know I'm always tickled because I could find Maggie actually, putting that down as a memory for us.
And Maggie was an actress for a number of seasons at the Players, and ended up owning property just south of the Peninsula Players on the water, and lived there for many, many years.
Many. And she always amazed me because I love listening to her. Her trained voice and vocabulary and ability to tell a story was just...
She was a great conversationalist.
So much, just mesmerizing.
Yes.
And everything. So, yes.
And so, we got through the 39 season.
We did. And within that too, the world events were starting to affect Peninsula Players. And Caroline was always aware of what was going on in the world around her, as was the family. So the Wharf Theater Sunday night performances, they started donating the admission to that to the American Red Cross to help benefit and raise funds for those suffering from the European war effort,
Hmm.
because that was starting to go on overseas. And um, the last production that they were going to do was Richard, and this show had got moved around a little bit throughout the season. Richard was adapting a French play called The Dreadful Parents, and he was adapting it to English. It was very successful in Paris the year before, and Caroline was supposed to come back and be in that, and she was on site rehearsing for that. But then they ended up canceling the production because Caroline needed to return to California because Rodian then enlisted. So Rodian, as a British citizen, is seeing what's going on in Britain and England and enlists into the Royal Canadian Air Force. And he is going to go into flight school and training to be a fighter pilot.
Hmm.
And so Caroline hops a train, leaves Dark County, and goes to California to be with Rodian at the end of that season. And they ended up canceling that production, and I don't believe they ever did produce that show.
And then later that year, I think in December of 39, is when Britain declared war on Germany.
Declared war. Yep.
And which leads us right up to 1940, and I guess we could call that decade the war
The war
years.
years. Yes.
And we will get into that decade in our next interview.
And in our next visit.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so tune in for that. And Audie, thanks again, and
You
I
are
look
very
forward
welcome.
to a whole nother period of time. All right,
Exactly.
all right,
Exactly.
all
Thanks,
right.
Greg.
Thanks. We'll talk soon.
Okay.